good morning, everyone. Let's start the meeting. So,
Morning.
Charlie, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm probably going to hand it over to Nate first off here for our Freaky Friday or Big Finance Friday to go over some things, and then I've got a laundry list of just things I wanted to update you on. I wasn't here last week, I know, for the local roads presentation, but in addition to some general things on finance I wanted to update on after Nate does his Big Finance Friday things, talk a little bit about the courthouse funding in the band, kind of a general overview of what's in there. I know there's going to be a meeting, a full meeting with the community and council next Thursday at 6 p.m. to really dive really deep into the details here. We're going to put together a much more in-depth presentation, and especially on the finance piece. And then we'll have Finance Friday, which we're kind of gathering up a lot of the things you discussed last week, and we'll discuss over the next week on what will be in the band to give you kind of a budget book on that next Friday, or I should say a band book, which will eventually become the SIP, the Capital Improvement Plan book. But we wanted to start this off right. I know we originally talked about trying to get kind of the full capital improvement plan, but there's such a need for that roads piece that we wanted to really, let's clear the decks on that. Let's get those out in the street, get best price for next spring to get those roads in. But it's also the initial stages of really developing a capital improvement plan in the same format and processes that we did with the budget. So excited about that. And with that, I'll send it over to Nate.
All right, Big Finance Friday. Full crowd. Here we go. So, I have on the screen, obviously, what I present, every month to show where we're at year to date. We got no lines on the screen. If you log on your computer, council, you can actually see the lines to show where we should be at. But obviously, yellows are, I don't know what the word is, caution, slow down. Green, good, and then obviously red. Now, this includes all these accounts include income and expenses, so that gives you the budget of where we're at right now. These are all up to date. This is showing obviously through, if you see the 10/24, so this is through the end of October. These are current up to date financials between Ashley and myself, the whole team. The 2020 fiscal year 2025 financials are accurate, up to date, and obviously Ashley and myself are going back and working on reconciliation to make sure we're good for 24, get that audit ready to go. Audit team still thinks we can have it done by December, and that's the goal. So that's what we're going to work for. It's a lot of work, like I tell you guys every Friday, but we are getting there. Slowly but surely, we are chipping away. I also have printed in front of you guys, and to the lovely audience we have here, anyone who wants a copy, which will also be online at ellsworthmaine.gov. Just all the accounts where we're at through October. The actuals, if you look at the first column, it shows the actuals from July through October of 2023. And then obviously you have the second column, which is current. And then our budget for this year. And then obviously the difference is where we're, the gap between the actual and the budget. I put on the taxes at the top. Taxes are on the top. I know we talked about that last time, just so you can see where we're at currently. And if, obviously, like I always tell you guys, if there's anything else that you want to see, please let me know. It is a lot of work, but I do think it's worth it. So anything that you feel like you want to see, or what should be present that maybe the public should want to see also, we're open to do it. We're transparent. We want to make sure everything is open to the public, because like I said, we have nothing to hide. I also have the reserve account. I printed that because I just got that yesterday. So the council members, you should probably see, I think everyone should have it, just the up-to-date October 31st, where all the reserve accounts, where we sit currently in those accounts. And then also, just so you guys are aware, I did print our budget timeline.
Yeah, that's good to see.
I'm going to steal Ashley's for a second. Just so you guys are aware, obviously our goal, it's sad to say, our goal is not to be like last year. So our goal is to be ahead of the curve. So just to give you an idea of what we're shooting for, I won't read all of them, but our goal is to, by beginning of March, have all the budgets compiled so Charlie can go over them, make sure any edits or anything, any anything he needs to talk to with departments are finalized. So by March 31st, obviously beginning of April, we are ready to go for any budget meetings that we have. The goal is not to have 17 or 18 this year. I think we can try to
2025.
Yeah. Just try to trim that a little bit. Any questions? I know I kind of barreled through the financials.
Nate, I have a clarification, I guess, on, I know we've talked about this before, but again, just to be clear, when you look at the actuals, July through October versus the year-to-date budget, it looks like we've only taken in 50% of our, just looking at the top line, receivables. And I remember in a conversation, last time we talked about this, the Financial Friday, was the year-to-date budget is not divided like what we actually think will come in each month. It's basically divided by 12. So,
Well, this budget, this year-to-date budget is for the whole fiscal year.
year-to-date
Yeah.
means that, we would be comparing the actual to the year-to-date.
So instead of saying year-to-date,
Oh.
you might need to just
That's-
say budget.
But that's
I gotcha.
a completely different number. So that is not year-to-date budget, it's the fiscal year.
You're correct. You're correct, yes.
Okay, that makes it look
FYTD,
way
maybe.
better, thank you.
Sorry. That's actually a good catch. Actually, that's what Cassell prompts on the column, so that's my fault. I should have caught that.
Okay.
I
no,
was struggling to understand what you were asking, but yes, that's the budget for the whole year. So
Thank you, that makes a whole lot more sense.
That's a very
Thanks.
very good clarification, though. Thank you.
I think overall, Nate, this is really great. I don't know if you saw Michelle was clapping. She likes it so much.
If Michelle claps, I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. I think, so this is great, lots of numbers. Do you have can you give like a overview of like how you think
Yeah, I mean,
we're at and how's it
I mean,
looking?
for me, I guess my overview is this. Obviously, I've been here for, 8 months? So all I can do is kind of look back at previous years and see, like, obviously, I want to see, like, where we sit in our bank account compared to the last 3 or 4 years. So I looked at, like, the second week of November's warrant, and I went back 3 years. I think last year's were actually a little bit higher. The year before were a little bit lower. So, like, honestly, I feel like as far as our number in our bank account, we're sitting in a good spot. Obviously, we still have some of the TAN that if we need to. I don't feel like we'll need to, but we have some of that available also. So just with that, I feel like, once you're here more than a year, you can you have that historical data, like I'm sure Michelle and Tammy have, but like, just myself, I'm like, okay, where do we, like, if I look at our bank account right now, like, I could be like, oh, that's great, but I don't know, where were we set that last year? So that's why I look back the last 3 or 4 years. That's why I was, okay, we're sitting at a decent spot,
Okay.
so.
And are there any, like, I can look at the harbor.
Yeah.
Like, but I guess, and I know that's all relative. And
I'll say
there's
just because the
explanation.
harbor, the income, you'll see some of that obviously at the tail end of this,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
fiscal year, so.
Yeah. Is there any concerns as far as?
Well, yeah, honestly, like, I think it was code enforcement last time we were looking at, we're like, wow, what's going on with code enforcement? We found out actually something was coded incorrectly, it wasn't going to the correct account, which is why I love this, because if you guys or anyone wants to go in and be like, why is this like that? And I'd be like, oh, shoot, that's going to the wrong account. We can fix that and do journal entries or whatever we need to do. So, and I think that obviously once we get out of reconciling the past and getting past that, we'll have more time to dive in to make sure these accounts are where they need to be at. But yeah, I feel like for the most part, like I said, obviously you see some of the yellows and you might be a little concerned, but like I said, incomes are tied into that also. So I think like once we see the incomes come in as well, I think we'll be okay.
And I would imagine some departments, if they have a big spending for whatever reason that was anticipated. it's
Exactly.
gonna Push it, but then they're not.
Yeah, exactly. Like for instance, like social service, you could be like, oh man, but obviously we already sent out I think we have maybe one more social services check, I could be wrong.
Just half.
Half one,
Or
sorry.
Y splits their
Yeah.
payments into 2, so we have
So like
one.
you could be like, oh shoot, we're 97% of the budget. Well, we've already budgeted that and we've already sent that out.
Yeah,
So, like,
exactly.
so stuff like that is
Yeah, and
is accounted for.
And does this divide it by 12? I mean, like, how is it saying, okay, 12 months,
it's gonna be like $100,000 or
Well-
$120,000, so you're only supposed to be able to spend $10,000.
I'm sure you can't see it, but like social
so-
services, the budget is 34,000. Like this says projected 99 based on our current rate, but obviously we're not gonna go 99 because we budget 34,150, that's what we send out.
And that was, to Tammy's point, that was a question, I was trying to reconcile this with the concerns for the yellow. Again, my sense is that the actual year-to-date, you just divide by 12, not when you actually anticipate revenue and
Yeah,
expenses. So if someone were to see those yellows, it looks like, God,
Yeah, because like I said, what
it's
it's,
a lot of caution flags, but
The-
not with reality.
yeah, because the yellows are showing you, like I said, based on this rate, that like, if I look at legal services, based on this rate, you're gonna spend 138,000. Well, we might have had a couple big invoices at the beginning of the year that we're not gonna have obviously later on. They're just saying, based on this rate, we're projecting 138.
Yeah, and those things like debt service or, talking to
Yeah.
Sulisard last year, which I'm really excited. I think we're gonna have a lot, like, almost perfect, as Sue says, close is not good enough, but in finance, where we really have taken a full year of actuals, like sitting this time next year, we'll be able to put multiple lines on each other and just see like our spending from last year and the longitudinal aspect to it, our revenues from last year and the longitudinal aspect to it, and layer those over. But because the budget transfer in the software systems and, to be frank, just not good budgeting practices for a few years before, it's hard to like have those there. So it's, that's one of the pieces. There's also, in addition to like the first steps in January, when we start meeting with the department heads, we're probably gonna do like half days with each of the department heads. And first step is to really
Yeah.
dig into your actuals, which last year wasn't even really an option. They were going, because they didn't have hard data. It was like Munis and Cassell, but now we're all in Cassell. We built the budget in here. And let's really dive into your actuals and, are these buckets all absolutely correct? Where we're at now, a little bit more projection so that when we come into this next budget season, I know for a lot of the questions you asked, well, how did this compare? And how did this, that we're gonna be, here's where we are at. And some things might be over and some things might be under. But really having a lot more data to go with, I think is gonna be great this season.
No, all of that is great. I would suggest too, as a goal for the next budget, that we're able to parse out, not just divide by 12, because that's not what we anticipate, but when we anticipate the revenues and expenses, so that when we see yellows, we know it's a legit concern
Yeah.
versus it'll all even out, we think.
Yeah.
So, and I realize why we couldn't do it this year.
Because anything like this is great. It's a great way to start and look at. And every report, no matter how much data you have, is gonna need analysis because it's just
Yeah.
not perfect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So maybe for the finance committee, the next time, you look through the reports and you give us something to say, these are the notable
Yeah.
things that you should be looking at. Like the harbor is red, but it opens back up in May and you've got a month and a half of revenue that's
Yeah.
missing, or, and some things like that. And
So
maybe if you just did that.
Just a couple key points to
Just,
kind of,
yeah, these are the key points, everything is looking, good,
Mm-hmm.
or, but these are the key points that you should be looking at and the things that you should be thinking about
Yeah.
for next year, or whatever.
No.
That would be real, just a bullet point summary.
No, I appreciate the feedback, thank you.
Yeah, I would love it if we could, we talked to Cassell, we had one meeting just on, the other thing I want like a revenue expenses, kind of where we're at,
Yeah, the
total kind of
NIPS.
marked, and just like as that piece, and it's interesting, they don't really have that built into their modules, I made a request for it, but in an ideal world, yeah, you'd have the math behind it, know kind of our revenue cycles, and then have that match to the color coding. I almost like want to take the color codings off here, because it can be, almost every time I go into something, it's like, oh.
It's not bad, though, because.
And so it opens up my eyes, obviously, to where I can go in there and click and see, what it is that's causing it. So I do agree, like, sometimes it can be misleading, but at the same time,
It helps you
it's
analyze.
better than just looking at numbers, honestly.
If we were an organization that had like just monthly payments for everything, this would be so easy and you wouldn't need anything, but we don't, and budgets are fluid, and these financial reports are fluid depending on what's happened the month before. So that's why just, your points, this is where we are, this is what I think is happening, even, your cash analysis or anything like that, just helps. I actually have a report that I do that's pretty similar to this, it's called Financial Benchmarks.
Okay,
So I can look and see where we are in our benchmarks of revenue, because, it's a professional organization, there's no
Yeah.
such thing as certain revenue, right? And so if you know, and I think as you go along and you understand like excise tax, and when is the normal time that people pay their real estate tax bills, and when is the normal time?
Yeah.
When's the uptime that people actually purchase new cars, and, you know, and you'll start figuring out, well,
Yeah.
we should get this and this.
Which comes, from
Yeah.
longevity. so.
And that's just like what you're doing now, just looking at actuals from prior
Yeah.
years, if they're accurate.
Yeah, if they're-
And you can see that there's always trends in everything you do.
Yeah.
It's- So, I think this,
Yeah.
I did clap, because I think this is all so great that there is a possibility of analysis, and that we can look down. I did, the first thing I did is I saw that harbor, and I went to look and said, oh, okay, it's revenue, it's not
Yeah.
expenses.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the other thing with I have a you're able to design these for kind of how you want. And I have the general fund, I pulled that in thinking it was like, this is gonna, and it was just bright red, and I was, oh my God. And then I realized it was because it's thinking in the 12-month categories, and it's like, you have too much revenue, so it's so like, that's why it triggered red. I was like, well,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be great? And so
Yeah.
anyways, it's small pieces like
That's
that.
really funny.
Congratulations, I think this is great.
Yeah, this
this
is
really
fabulous.
great.
It's better than my idea, because I was thinking, like, take the worst department and bring them in here every month, and we'll publicly shame them. But, I
We'll have that in our back pocket, because that's
mean,
really
but I like
effective.
your criticism better, like, we can do that, too.
That's too funny.
God.
Also, I don't know if you want me to just kind of mention ARPA funds really quick.
That's great. Yeah, do it.
But, obviously, Charlie, we have till December 31st of this calendar year to basically allocate what our ARPA funds are. I know that was part of the budget. So obviously, we looked at that this week. I sent Charlie a report. I should have had it, but it's not 100% accurate. But basically showing where we're at as far as year-to-date. So we're going to meet with the departments, make sure that obviously we do have invoices, quotes, whatever we need to allocate those funds. Because like I said, we have December 31st of 2024. We don't have to spend it, we just have to allocate
Have
it.
you reviewed what's required under the treasury rules to classify as allocate or obligate?
I'll be honest with you, Ashley's done a lot more of that than I have, so,
I was just looking at this issue yesterday for a municipal
Oh,
client,
okay.
and so I went into the regs, and they have, it's like, you can't just say we're gonna spend it. You
We have to have a purchase order or an invoice from a
Or
company
contract
or
or-
some kind of
yeah.
signed
Yeah.
contract between us and them
Yeah.
stating we are going to buy it, and that's the allocation that we
Yeah.
need.
So-
So that's what we're gonna meet with the department heads on and make sure that they have those
Everything,
purchase
yeah.
orders or invoices or some kind of contract between the company and the municipality saying like, yeah, we are purchasing this.
Great. Sounds like
she's the
you're
ARPA
on
boss.
top
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, and
Did we, I know this, I went through the whole budget process, so I should know this, but did we allocate in the budget all of the ARPA funds?
we're
Yeah.
about 10, and we just,
Yeah.
that's in Nate's report to me.
Yeah.
We're about 10,000 shy with the interest of like remaining funds. And Nate and team, there's also like some of them, for the most part, so far, have come in under. So, we had 25,000 for security door upgrade. That one came in at 18,000 for, we have those 2 doors out there, but one doesn't lock at all. So it creates, us people sleeping there at night, oftentimes. So just a little bit better security in that piece. But that's gonna be a little under, so
Yeah.
they've got to email out to the department heads on December 1st is
That's why,
your.
yeah, we just need to know for sure where we're set.
And then I
Obviously.
can come back here, we had the December meeting, if we need to reallocate a bit. I've got some areas that could be considered for that I've in the back of my head. Luckily we have Ashley, we also have Matt, who's kind of became expert in ARPA during the budget process. It's one of my questions actually for you all, Michelle, and Tammy, but we have EV chargers, on the agenda again, and it was approved last time around. We did get approved by the state of Maine for funding for that, and there's a $80,000 tax, or credit rebate we get immediately that revision handles, and then there's like a $35,000 or so, and I'll have these details in the memo, that the federal tax credit that we acquired next year. So on this $130,000 or $140,000 project, it's like a $10,000 city match, but we also can make money off these as well. So I'm looking into, we have about that 10,000 left over. That, could ARPA pay for that? Could, if that's the end of the cycle, could we clear that? Oh, now she's saying no. So
We talked about it before.
We did some research.
You did some
yeah,
research
we'll
and
have
stuff
to
on that.
Meet
Okay.
with you on it, yeah. there's-
I think what it also, I know we're going to talk about, or John Stein's going to, there's a funding shortfall for the Healthy Acadia I've reached out to the state to see if there's additional funding. I've reached out to the county who has some additional ARPA funding. That can go to that type of thing. So if there's a clear the decks at the end of the year and, and there's some surplus funding, I could see it going to a social services type organization like that. But getting you all, other options too. I think it can go to road stuff, it can go to other things, so.
Say, I mean, it'd be
Yeah.
great to have it go to infrastructure. I mean, that's something we struggle with all the time, and not to say anything bad about Healthy Acadia by any means. But I think it would be really great to use those ARPA funds on our own infrastructure that we're struggling all the time to pay for, honestly.
Yeah.
Calm down out there. Calm down in the audience, please.
So yeah, well, I think obviously the ideal is, not a penny goes back to the feds from city accounts. So we'll make sure we're on it. We'll have some options for you all on that. So hopefully we can, and John is reaching out to the county on just, I think they have a couple million in surplus. So I haven't seen news reports on exactly what that's going towards, so.
And Healthy Acadia is a very appropriate thing for the county, because Healthy Acadia is the county, it's not Ellsworth. So
Right.
they absolutely should be putting the money to that.
Yeah, and you see the details from them on exactly where folks are coming from. The majority that are being served by them are from Ellsworth, but there is additional cities and towns that they've been at. So it's definitely a countywide thing. And
Absolutely.
it also, I noticed even the data they had there, which I have to follow up on, it's like, where have you spent the last 30 days? But I'd be interested in, knowing where have you spent the last year? I think the amount of cities and towns, I think Ellsworth, because it's a service center, oftentimes
And
because
that's-
that.
yeah, and that's why, not to get into this on finance, but that is why the majority of the people are saying they're from Ellsworth, is because we're the service center and this is where they are.
Yep.
This is where the services are. They're not gonna go to Lemoyne and sit. They're not gonna go to Hancock and sit.
They're here.
The services aren't there. So that should be taken into consideration when they say that, the majority of the people are from Ellsworth. There probably is a lot from Ellsworth, if there is, because we're so much bigger than everybody else, but
Yeah, we've talked,
individually.
and they would, yeah, they're very, we had some deep discussions, not to go too far down this, but I was also concerned, are we, with that opening, are we becoming a magnet from people all over the state and people elsewhere? And they were really, in their data, no, this is Hancock and Washington County. There's a fair amount that are coming down here because we're a service center for them too. But this really is kind of this regional increase. It's a really complex problem. But I should also say we had a great meeting with the school this week on budget and kind of timeline as well. Amy was hoping to probably come to a finance committee meeting in early December to talk about their budget timelines, which we're trying to align with our own this year. And they've got a great team over there, and I know last year Nancy and folks was a little rushed, and we kind of felt like we were, I know we had some concerns that, hey, we have to, and I think that everybody did, on just, we have to vote this piece, and then there's this other vote, and we don't have both sides of the equation, and we're making kind of a big decision for half the budget. So how do we stop that next time so that everybody felt like they have the time to consider both and not go with one without knowing the other if we had to do any kind of cut exercises or felt. So we're trying to just get very aligned on that. The initial idea is probably that they'll be coming to you with some initial presentations, starting December on kind of where they're at, and then, that kind of March timeframe will be their kind of presentation piece, and then there'll just be a seamless handoff to, all right, you've seen the schools, now you'll start seeing the city side of things, and then all of that process concludes before there's a school budget vote. Or anything, so you really have, you've had the time to consider those two things.
Last year, we had to have that all done by April because those numbers had to be ready for election. And so that was the issue, is that everything has to be for the clerk's office, including the numbers in their budget and advertised and ready. So that's what, when I looked at this and said, we're gonna have that same problem because we're not even gonna start our budget, and we're gonna have to have the approval of the
Yeah,
the
that's
school
exactly, I
department's
was like,
budget.
ugh.
Let me look at that when we.
We can bump things up.
Yeah, but let me look with the school and the voting timeline when it has to be voted on. I know it was on the schedule for that, but is that statutorily required? I thought I talked to.
That would be great, because I think it was pretty confusing last year.
Yeah.
So the beginning of, is it the first week of June that they vote? So is it 8 weeks? Yeah, so and then they have.
'Cause you have to have it
the
printed out.
ballots
There's no,
squared away
there's no
before,
primary or
8
anything
weeks?
this year, though, so
6
won't
to
this
8
be-
weeks?
Won't this be just for this?
School budget, that's it.
School budget,
However,
so,
I have to look into, because I do believe we're at the 3-year mark for us to have a referendum question for whether the citizens want to vote for.
We do it every year.
No, I meant,
vote for the school
right,
budget.
to have either the council do the school budget or to have the citizens
Yeah.
vote in the school budget. So I think that's every 3 years, and I think we're at the 3-year mark
I
this
think
year.
we are too.
So I have to go look into that.
So we might be able to have the vote in.
Too, because that was when it was the RSU, but there was some comment made last year that it didn't include if you're a city department, if you're not part of the RSU.
I'm pretty sure it's not mandatory that this go out for
Right.
election.
Yeah, the guidance from our attorney last year was that it was really kind of an advisory vote. And that was non-binding, and it's really the council's decision for that piece, which would mean, you could do the vote for the school budget and our own budget on the same day. That's why I kind of, let me put a pin
That would be great.
on that too,
Would be
because,
great. So I definitely need to look into that.
so yeah, this year we might be able to, if we wanted to do the advisory vote still, you could, but maybe later because of the lack of primary pieces, but also, there was a difference of opinion, I think, between our legal and the school's legal on that side of things. It is a complex issue, so I want to get clarity there, because if we don't need to do it, I don't think we,
It saves almost $7,000.
yeah, so savings plus having, it wasn't a huge election, so having a very small subset of people vote on the school budget just for that piece alone, that's not a,
It's like 50 to 60 people voting on the budget if you're doing it in an election laws. And it costs what? $300-400 a vote, something insane, so
yeah.
you have a small election.
And some of the, and I know talking to Amy and team too, they were, just the detail that the council wants, they're really very open and excited about kind of a better aligned process, so that the city council, they have their own budget processes, their own budget meetings with their folks, but really having the time and to kind of get to what you all want to see from the school's budget, and the same kind of detail that we're providing, so we're working on that too. Great. On the reserve accounts too, we kind of put a pin in this on last budget season, and I do feel like we'll need to revisit this. As we talked about, there's some things in here that don't exist anymore, and some things that are. So how do we sort of think of our reserve funding and start using it in ways that I'm sure Michelle and Tammy, when you all are here and helped design the system initially, but we still need to be, I feel like, fully reconciled to really, start taking a strategic approach to, do we consolidate some of these accounts? Is this do we start funding them for this next budget cycle in different ways so that they can be used appropriately? We've seen it even this cycle, right, where, okay, we have these 5 trucks that aren't, that was an unanticipated expense. How does it come out of that? And then you forward fund it the next year, to replenish through reserve accounts. I feel like there's a whole separate module, not just of capital improvement planning, but once we're reconciled, it's going to trigger another piece of work. We're reconciled. We're up to date on all our finances. We know, what could be encumbered, what couldn't be encumbered, and that's really going to be, let's take a look at these reserve accounts, how they're structured, so that next budget cycle, we're either, consolidating, funding more potentially, or at least utilizing. So it's, in the past, it seems like for 5 years, so these have just kind of been there. And I'm glad they're acquiring interest, especially I think it's like 150,000 or so bigger than the last time I looked at this. So, but how do we want to use this reserve account funding? I was actually talking to somebody I played tennis with, who is working in Surrey now, and he's a similar thing. They've kind of found all these accounts all over the place. There's the Higgins Trust as well. So these things have sort of been orphaned, left, which is good in some ways because at least they're accumulating interest and they are in bank accounts that are doing that. But are they as best purpose? Are they designed for our newer budget processes to be most aligned with the needs of the city? So, so looking forward to that too.
if we have a plan to use the reserves, can we please have a plan to replenish them too? Because that's what these are for, emergency situations. So like when the playground equipment was broken and we had to wait because we didn't think we had enough money, that's what that reserve is for, so the kids don't lose their slide. And, you know, and things like that. And the same thing with, you know, the highway equipment. What happened with those trucks was exactly what this is for. But there should be a reserve policy for replenishment so
How-
that we don't lose them,
how
because once
was-
they're gone, they're gone.
How was it done in the past, as far as, like, at the end of the budget season, or at the end of the fiscal year, would you allocate funds to put in here, or is that kind of how?
Could.
It could be encumbered from
Yes,
unused
yeah.
funds
That's
from the
basically-
budget.
yeah.
Instead of, like, if we had a bunch of trucks that came in under price,
Yeah.
then you could encumber the rest of those funds
And
into
put
a
it-
reserve.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a bunch of different ways that we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you do.
But it
You
doesn't
have
look
to,
like,
that was part of your agreement, yeah, but,
but I don't think they've been transferred over. I don't think a check was cut from
oh, you'd have a lot
checking
more money.
account.
Our checking account has the actual money. Right.
Well, you got two different, you got this one, and then you got an
Yeah, so
actual.
a check should have been cut it was used to be $35,000 a year.
Yes.
So cut a check from the general
So,
checking
yeah.
account and put it into Bar Harbor Bank reserve, so, and it
And
looks similar to what it's always been.
And hence, like a total, like, you know, really diving deep in here. I think it has been, I mean, Mike's, the wastewater one was the only one that seemed to be operating, yeah, when you have a bigger expense, they pull off of it. But something kind of broke, obviously, with the finance pieces. So how do we, you know, I think there could be an argument made to just, you know, gosh, we might need to be more in here, consolidate. And then, yeah, when these, but simplify too, so that it's, hey, there's a capital reserve account for, you know, obviously our enterprises would need to be separated out so that there's one for wastewater, one for water. We're gonna have some conversations on that in the future as well, and then one for highway. You know, there is a highway one that's, you know, there's road improvement, and there's these other pieces, and then so when these things come up, they come off the reserve account, so they're not, but then, yep, it's also tagged for next year, we're gonna replenish.
Replenish.
I agree.
It
Yeah, I
would just
agree.
be great if we had some kind of a policy of,
I'll say, I agree with
Okay.
Michelle, I feel like their funds are basically a savings account, but if you have no plans to replenish,
then they're gone.
then what's the point?
And be careful with the jump playground, those are remaining funds from raised funds, because people made donations, so those are unused funds for that, so those cannot be put in with anything else.
All
I
right,
think
cancel
that's
the
same-
employee appreciation.
Yeah, employee appreciation, 17,000, but that's $7,000 or whatever it is.
But could it go to Knowlton Park?
No, that is what it is, the Knowlton Park and the jump playground.
Yeah, I'm saying, but could the jump playground, even though that no longer exists, like, I think that's like a really great example. It was supposed to sort of do these things, but now it really just sat there. So we got to figure out, do we have to
What-
give that money back? Do we?
So, in the last, Tim, remind me, but when we did the last playground, didn't we get donations for that playground? You and Jack and I raised that.
Yeah.
So that's specifically for the playground playground equipment. The Knowlton Park, we did the same thing, we raised funds to create the park, and these are the leftover funds, so that can go to anything in the park, so that could be playground or park.
So I guess my question
So
is,
you have to be careful and look at the history of some of these reserves.
so that would be, that's a great example. It's like, and we just got to, that's why I feel like it needs a full, all right, jump playground no longer exists. Can we just consider that playgrounds
It
in
was
general?
called- It
This-
was called Jump Into, the jump playground does exist, because it was just replaced from the wooden ones to the other ones, and when we did the fundraiser for it, it was called Jump
Jump
Into.
To.
Jump To, or Jump Into.
Yeah.
There was Jump To, and then there was Jump Into something, I can't remember what it's called, but it was all the jump
Yeah,
playgrounds.
so the jump playground is the playground.
Is
at
the
So it's
playground.
still the new, so
Does
the
it-
playground is that, so we could use.
Join us in making a park or playground or something. some
Something
sort of
like that, I
stands
can't
for it,
remember what it was, but yeah, so the jump playground is the playground.
Oh, that's what it stands for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
All the
Is
time,
that-
I'm like, what does jump even mean?
Join us.
I thought it was like
Jump
trampoline
the
park.
Playground. Yeah.
Right.
Join us in
um,
making a playground, that's what it was, yeah. And then, but, so it just, when we did the newest one, because it went from the wooden one to this one, there were funds raised for that equipment.
Yeah.
This
there
is
it
the leftover.
This is the leftover, but not the,
And then the Knowlton Park is the same thing. We raised a lot of outside funds to make that park, and this is the leftover money.
So could
to
the
be used
jump
for
account be
maintenance.
used for the replacement of the slides?
Yes.
Could have been, yep.
And, has that been done? Because that seems like an appropriate use for those funds.
Right.
no, and this is where I get, in my ideal world, we have maybe we create a system where it's just a little more straightforward to not have to do each piece, and, we could fund use this money to, fund, there's plenty of playground and equipment, it's a very well-used area, and then future stuff could be done through a capital reserve account if something breaks a jump, or a facilities reserve account, and we use it from here, replace, and then we replenish that, as opposed to trying to match it to each one, which is, I think was the intent, but never really executed.
Well, I would, except that those were funds specifically raised for the playground, and you need to respect that. And maybe in the future, if the city does fundraising, you say, and any excess would be used for the broader purpose, something to cover that.
Yeah, and that's the thing with all of these, if they were tagged for that, if it was financial piece, like, it's either gotta be done for that playground.
Right.
And we need to utilize those funds for such, but not just keep them in here gaining interest,
But
and unutilized.
making the difference between funds that were raised from outside versus the city decided to allocate, there's very different levels of responsibility on how targeted we are with the funding. And then to Michelle's point, I think as we're looking at a plan for replenishing, we also need, like, what are the target figures? What is an appropriate, what are appropriate reserve funds to hang on to? And then what is an appropriate level to have in them? And then that's our target, and then you've got something to build on for when we draw down, how much do we?
Yeah, and also
Because what do we need there?
is it all capital, as opposed to, and we seem to kind of have our reserve accounting in really the tan. You want about 10% of your operating expenses. A lot of seasoned towns, they have just that separate, like, rainy day fund essentially, but that's a little more broad than just your seems to be more in your capital reserve
Well, that's
accounts.
kind of your fund balance too. That's your undedicated fund balance, is your rainy day also that you can put into your budget if things go over. So, I agree with you that there's way too many of these, although a lot of these were created, like when the jump playground, you purposely raise more money because you want to make sure the playground gets maintained. Because at one point, there was it was problematic that things weren't being maintained. People would build things, organizations, DeMeyer Field was a big one. Organizations would create these things, they'd hand them over to the city, and then they would go to pot. The
Right.
DeMeyer Field, the soccer fields, and things like that. So on some of these, that was why the reserve was created, so that wouldn't happen when we purchase or we raise funds, public funds, private funds, for these different projects, and then the city takes them over, and then they lose sight of the maintenance, which is what happened even with the reserve here, because people didn't, the finance turnover. But
And just to go back to that point, we have paid for, there was the slide and I don't know if there were external costs for the splash park.
Yeah, but
Have we then drawn down? That is a very appropriate use to draw down some of these jump funds.
So those came from I could correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, but I believe we budgeted for Knowlton and for others. So that's the other pieces where, it seems as though they were just using either, again, I wasn't here for a long time in the past, I'm assuming, but these seem to be totally untouched for 5 years, so.
And my point, yes.
So it was general fund money.
Within the last 3 months, we made investments in the playground because it had to happen.
So this is the ideal time to draw down.
Thank you, that's where I was going.
But we-
So
Except then you would
funded-
have to- if you can budget for something, you should. Reserves should be for emergency situations, and then returned once that is done.
Okay.
If you can budget for it, we absolutely should be. It's a responsibility, it's city property, right? So it's very appropriate to budget for it. But for something like the broken
Unbudgeted,
slide
yeah.
that has been sitting there because it didn't get budgeted, that's appropriate to use this on an emergency situation and then replenish or do whatever you want
So
with it.
what do we,
Well, we have Knowlton Park in the budget, I think there is a
I
Knowlton
think it's in
Park.
the
There's a
budget.
Knowlton Park budget.
right, was it enough to cover? Because I'm hearing both things. I agree, we budgeted for it, but that the slide, and maybe the splash park was just maintenance that needed to be done, but the slide, was that budgeted for? Or that seems to me, that was like we didn't realize actually it's 2 slides.
Or it's within budget, right? So things happen all the time in the highway and other places, and they budget to anticipate that. The
Okay.
capital reserve would be like, we drained all of our highway equipment, like maintenance stuff, we're gonna
Right.
need to go into the capital reserve. But that seems to be a double, and it's not just, which is to me what especially once we're reconciled, why this really needs a deep dive review. Same thing with cemeteries, right? We budget every year for the taxpayers for cemeteries for I think it's $8,000. It's just off the top of my head. However, we have
Pardon?
Higgins Trust, other things that can be used for cemetery funds. But they're, I'm glad they're growing and they're in their own dedicated accounts. But there's this almost double accounting of like, this money is sitting in one place and then there's we're taxing for money and using it there as well. And how are these, and we're gonna, dive deeper into those cemetery pieces, is there enough funding in cemeteries across these areas so that their own reserve accounts can fund
Right.
these pieces? Or do you want to just keep that there in perpetuity in case something but there's such sizable areas now where they're, year-to-year expenses are much lower than the size of the pot is growing. So, should we continue to allocate city taxpayer year-to-year funds on some of these things when the reserve funding is growing to an extent where you could.
Or is the reserve funding growing because we haven't been taking care of the cemeteries? So another conversation, same stream, for another day.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Or the playgrounds and these other pieces. So
Yeah.
there was, and I think that's kind of what's happened. So Knowlton Park, these things break. They
It's-
don't go to the reserve account. They just use undesignated fund balance.
It's just so refreshing to have the information, and then we can have these conversations, and it's the way it
So
should be
when we're
happening.
budgeting, we can be
Yeah.
like, okay, we're budgeting X for Knowlton Park, but we also have this reserve
Right.
of Y, what do we want that reserve to be? And,
Yeah.
do we want
Those are
to put
great
more in,
policies
or-
to have in place that we
Yeah,
don't yet,
maybe we
so.
always want Knowlton Park Reserve to have $20,000 in it, right? So,
Yeah, that's setting that standard, which should be.
standard.
And the cable television reserve, do we want to just keep that there for 20 years? Or like, what is that? Is it for something specific? How would
I
that be
do believe
used?
it is for something specific, and I can't remember off the top of my head right now. The cable TV reserve had something to do when we built the.
Yeah, that
TV.
was for the,
Somebody gave us money to start it, right? Or grant
Yeah.
funds or something
yeah,
like
for the
that.
cable TV station.
Yeah, so if there's any like vestiges in here that don't have like specific requirements for spending, then it's like, all right, if we can, we don't need the cable television reserve, let's put that money towards something.
Road reserve.
Road
or-
reserve.
Yeah, no, I agree.
broadband.
Gary Fortier headed that up forever. He'll know.
Jason probably will know.
Jason might know too.
Yeah.
And then
I
kind
can't
of.
remember because I think it might have been, I don't know if that was a grant, Tammy, when we were gonna update the station. I can't remember. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, so it's, and is it in line in our year-to-year expenses on, like, road improvement reserve? We're going to more of a bonding cycle with road improvement. We've had road improvements, but there's also 320,000 in the road side of things for this year as well. Should that be more of a debt service? And, like, or do we want to actually start utilizing it when a road comes up and then, and pivoting off, and is that enough in there to really, so that these reserves are actually utilized and then replenished, utilized and replenished, as opposed to just kind of remaining sitting there?
I think they should be utilized and replenished for emergencies, like the road reserve. We had a major washout, I think it was on the 1A side of Christian Ridge. And that money is, you get an emergency situation, you gotta build that road back up, and money can come out of the reserve to do that, type thing. I mean, I think that we should consolidate personally, but I'd like to see a plan. I really do, and I would really like to make sure that we know exactly why the money is in all these different accounts, and then have a plan for,
Probably need to know exactly what all these accounts are, because, like Charlie said, I could be like, cable TV, just combine it, and you guys are like, no. I don't know what all this stuff is.
that's what
so-
I mean. You really,
So we
and
kinda
the
have to
same
have
thing with the
a
Herb
general
Higgins
idea.
Fund and that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, and then it's aligned to current budget practices and,
Yeah.
because, you could ban for that road and do that. And that's, the other thing is, it just hasn't been done that way in a little while, so, I don't know. But lots of conversation on
There's
this.
also funds in here that have nothing in them, and it's like, do
Yeah.
they have something in them?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
just need
Like,
to be.
Or do we just, yeah.
The
like
tuition
special
shortfall
education
ironically has a
tuition.
shortfall.
It has a 1 cent.
Yeah, this is-
Very bizarre.
City Hall reserves, I mean, you can
That was
see,
a Jack one.
City Hall Reserve hasn't been touched in a while, and you see like a lot of, I know we're gonna be talking a lot more about that in the band, or the next capital improvement plan piece, so we're reconciled, we have a real capital improvement plan that's updated, and that might also trigger, like, how do we wanna think of these things and fund them? Is it through band bond cycles, is it reserve counting?
The reserves for the school department that we approved 2 years ago, those aren't on here.
I don't know if they're on
School
the,
district?
Yeah, they had like 4 or 5, the 4 that we put 10,000, so the 20, what are we in, 25 now, 24 budget? This year's budget, was it, Tammy, or the, when did I come on the council? I can't remember,
Yeah,
anyways.
you're-
Whatever, I mean, it must have been the 24 budget.
2022?
There were 4 reserves that we approved for the school department.
And I had asked about that, and they
If you
said
look at-
that they wouldn't, it was like, they've never given us money for reserves. And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure you have, that's why these ones are
Yeah,
on
because it's
there.
part of the budget, it's the
Yep.
taxation money that
Yep.
needed to be set aside, and not in their budget.
Lots to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got thinking about, I'm looking at this going, these aren't funded. So I can't, we'd have to look at the budget again to see what, in the 24 budget.
Okay.
And it could
What
be
it
in the,
was that we
s-
gave them in the resolutions, but,
the school has their own accounting, I mean, we obviously disperse funds to the school, and then they have their own accounts and systems as well, but.
and we gave them, this year, we gave them permission to spend that money without coming to the council, because we have to. But it still should be in our, that's taxation money, that still should be in our reserves.
Okay.
And then, can I ask one more question?
No,
I'm sorry.
you're not allowed.
You love it when I come, right?
Yeah.
The encumbrances for '24, are we ready to bring those to the council for approval? The encumbrances from the '24, the '23 budgets?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, we're not ready, but we can.
Well, I just,
Can be
because I
ready.
know that it's been brought up in meetings, these were encumbered from '22 or '23, and nothing has actually been encumbered.
Yeah.
So it's actually it's actually spending money outside of our budget, so I think
Okay.
it would be good if that could be a project, and especially '24. I mean, we could at least start with '24.
Okay.
And know what we didn't spend in that budget, and that we want to keep, and not go to fund balance before the audit.
Gotcha.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. It's a much more detailed conversation
Yeah, I
because
can
of,
help you with it.
because of the way that they,
Yeah,
You
Tammy,
see, I was just staring at you like, yeah, we can do that. I mean, yeah.
It should
I
be done.
think Tammy and myself, we can definitely get that done.
It should be done before the audit, so that then the
Yeah,
auditors
no, I
can tell
know.
what
Yeah.
your encumbered funds balance and your not
No, you're right.
unencumbered.
I'm
And it's-
learning as I go.
Yeah, I know, no, I know you are, I'm sorry, that's why I just thought I'd bring it up, because it's,
You said that, I was like,
yeah, and we
no,
really,
not
this
right.
budget cycle, like nothing, except for the Red Bridge Road, I think, right, Mike?
Sure.
That was the only thing we considered, like, there's previous money spent for it. We
Well,
didn't,
there was $300,000 over 2 budget cycles that was supposed to be allocated for that have kind of.
right. It's, yeah, I just think, if you look at '24's budget, if they've got it reconciled, see what capital projects did not get funded, but we still want to do them, you can bring that forward, the money's already there, and then you don't have to borrow for it and spend interest.
Makes a lot of sense.
okay. I had a few other things.
Oh, Steve, I think Steve he was.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
My just quick question is there some universal ratio for the size of the budget to the size of the reserve?
That's a good question.
That's
It's a very good
something
question.
that I would just like to know. Is there a universal? Because when these numbers are jumping all over the place, maybe there is some monies in here that could get moved over. But is there, as a rule, whatever, like the overall reserve to run the city, there's some chatter about you need 4 months, $4 million to run the city, $1 million a month, roughly. I just wonder if there's that data we could grab, and, because some of these numbers don't need to be budgeted to add to, and some do, and some don't.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if there's some balance that says, hey, you should keep a 15% reserve of the size of the budget.
I mean, I feel like, just like any savings account, I think ideal to have at least 10%.
Well, I don't know what the
I
number
mean,
is. but-
I'm not saying that's what
Right, I'm just
what
saying.
they say, but I mean, I feel like 10% at least gets you over a month worth of.
So I think if you look in your,
12%.
MMA, there's a maximum fund, unencumbered fund balance that we can have.
We have a fund balance ordinance too,
And we have a fund balance ordinance that also talks about that.
and it should have the reserve funds in
And that's
there.
really that's your operating reserve, is your fund balance, your unencumbered fund
Yeah.
balance is your operating reserve. And there's state regulations on the maximum, plus we already have a policy.
Yeah,
Just another thing, Nate, sorry.
Yeah, well, while we're cleaning this up, I just think it might be healthy to
well,
come up with some sort of a ratio.
and the reconciliations that will have that, what's not, what's over and above, I have that from a gut because we've closed the year last year with, what was it, 1.8 around in the account? What was the?
I think it was like 1.4.
So that's, in some ways, that's a soft reconciling to the very end of your, now, there's still many expenses that are still coming in, maybe even revenues that didn't get budgeted over there. But, for a city of our size, at least talking to Sue Lessard, and when I did the municipal budgeting class with the mayor of Biddeford, or not, sorry, the city manager in Biddeford, it was 10%. And so for us, that was, 2.5, 3 million, and that's kind of what the TAN is based off of. But then the question is, do you keep that, just in fund balance? And is that your target goal to not drop under that as much? And then the separate is just for your capital reserve spending is kind of the separate piece on how much we need to keep in there for capital projects year to year. And that's why, like, in some ways, I almost just simplify in my head, how much money are we actually spending year to year on, like, these capital problems, and would also need to anticipate for the big emergency that would need to come out of here, and keeping that kind of capital piece for the year-to-year expenses that would need to be replenished, like what is actually going out, as opposed to, feels like there's like a smog aspect to what's been happening. Like everything's kind of there and we're just holding on to it, but thankfully, because if it would have been put into the general fund, it would have been spent. If it was just in there, there was a period of time when things were just, you could see a lot of undesignated fund balance spending. There'd be I saw those meetings. It's the way the police station was upgrades were funded was $1 million plus in undesignated fund spending. And yeah, I've been thinking about the 10,000. I'll talk to you all separately on it's ARPA for that's undesignated. Now we're going to make money for that EV charger, but yeah, without being reconciled, without having, we are under in a lot of accounts. But we need to be just every penny that comes out of this place that's undesignated is, has a replenishment plan for it and gets tracked and gets encumbered. That's square one. So we're made a lot of headway, but more headway to be made.
It's all going in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
It is. It
So
is.
Chapter 50.
Oh, okay.
The fund balance,
All
and
right,
it does discuss reserve funds and unassigned fund balance, committed funds.
Okay, thank you.
Um,
I'm excited for you to get started on that.
And just, those policies really go to the council to be approved, so if you want to change them.
Oh, there he
John?
is.
Times,
Johnny Appleseed's here.
A couple more minutes before we certify some results. So I'm glad Tina's here. She's got such like long-term knowledge of the organization too that I'm always happy to. Just to zip through things, in addition to next year's budget cycle, I think, Steve, you said it best, and congrats on the, it's not official yet, but during that forum on just, our wants, like, our needs exceed our means. And that's, so how do we, everybody wants a Parks and Rec director. That was clear on that council, even here. But that's an expensive piece. And then there's this other piece, and we saw some big tax increases these last few years. I know there's an article in the Ellsworth American that is at about, as a service center, our mill rate is actually on the low end of other areas. But that's cold comfort to hear an editorial with a spreadsheet to folks that have had 20, 30% increases and valuation increases. So, you can write all the editorials and tell people how they should really feel good about it. But, stable, predictable, increases, but also the service needs, so we're really pushing to look more in grant funding. I know the state just approved some bonds for, I think, historic preservation and trails. We got plenty of that. So I want to be first in on a lot more of these now. The deputy city manager piece, which we've got over 150 applicants. We've done, I think, 12 15-minute screeners of those 150, and and we're saying no to the second and third rounds to some really excellent candidates. But grants management is going to be front and center there, so we're pushing really hard to make sure that we can get every dollar that's not in the taxpayer here in to help fund some of those needs and wants. As Janet mentioned during the conversation about parking kiosks last week, they're also, herself and Matt are looking to the Thriving Communities Program, which is potentially a $30 million investment in the city with a potential $3 million match from us. So we got to start thinking of that $3 million match and potentially funding for it to get it, as well as a village partnership initiative that could be larger, but those are like 5 years out, right? Between now and then, that's not going to get to it's not going to help pay for Parks and Rec. It's not going to pay for a lot of the other investments in roads and other needs that are immediate. So, and that's one of the reasons that we're having the parking kiosk conversation. I know it's, and I want to be clear, it's informational right now. There's no proposal active or voting on, but there's potentially $1 million a year in funding on those pieces. And so we're going to talk more about that. The short-term rental regulation, again, is also another potentially contentious issue that has revenue generating potential, also has tax potential because of the property value increases that have happened in large ways because of short-term rental increases here. So really having the data for the council to consider, any changes that would raise revenue, but also could hurt revenue in other ways, so that we all have a lot of information going to the next cycle on, how to minimize the tax impact for all of our needs and wants to the extent possible. There's going to be police negotiations next year. They just passed recreational cannabis here, or not passed, I should say. It was, it was a 55-45 support for that, for the council to consider. I know we'll be talking more and more about the regulatory environment there. Unlike other states, unfortunately, we won't be, if the council were to move forward with that, there could be some impact fee, or some, not impact fees, but licensing fees, increases to property taxes by that kind of facility, upgrades. So that could potentially raise some revenue as well. And then, I got 2 minutes left, so we'll talk Thursday a lot more about the financing for the courthouse part of the ban as well, which to me it's growth. There's one piece in there, we've got just on a very high overview. I hate to have a minute to talk about this. There's up to $700,000 put in for the road that would start going through there, and $300,000 for the easement purchases for that road. It's been really interesting, and Larry will give an assessment kind of overview, but it's been really interesting to see how roads and access and potential development and growth is, in terms of broadening your tax base and raising revenue. I mean, there's one piece of land that if a road were to go through there, it goes from being a $44,000 piece of land to a nearly $700,000 piece of land. And to me, it was a kind of an aha moment on just how roads growth, like that's how you get, Ellsworth is in some ways fortunate, and it's a challenge on how to deal with this growth and support growth to minimize tax impact and start to be able to afford everything we need here without increasing the mill rate. So, yeah. And now we're at 9.
Now we're at 9 o'clock.
All right, do we all kind of shift around here? Let's just-
Yeah, maybe we'll kick the finance team out.
I think you're okay, you stay where you're at.
I'm in good shape.
How am I staying here?